Hello, and welcome to Conversations. I'm Jim Blow, your host. Very pleased that you're joining me back on Conversations is State Representative Adam Zemke from the 55th District.
Correct.
Okay, welcome back to Conversations.
Thank you very much, Jim.
And trying to remember numbers over the years, this is essentially what, northern part of Ann Arbor and part of western Washtenaw?
Actually, a little bit east. So
East now,
northern
okay.
Ann Arbor City and Ann Arbor Township, Pittsfield Township, York and Augusta Townships, and
Okay.
Milan City. So
Okay.
center part of Washington.
And rather diverse group of people to represent.
Very much so. You know, York Township still votes against me. Strongly
But
conservative.
I mean, it's a much more rural and
Very much so.
agricultural community
Very much so.
compared to the more technical and sort of the northern Ann Arbor development areas and that.
We have everything from the most liberal to the most conservative in terms of industry,
Right.
tech industry to agriculture industry, all over.
And you're in your third term as a representative, which means this is your final term because of term limits.
Correct, in the House. Yep.
And you've had 5 years, or going on 5 years now, of not only representing the district, but trying to accomplish and do things you want to do. And it's not, you've been minority the whole time.
I have, unfortunately.
Right.
Worked pretty hard to change that last
Right.
time.
But in working in an elected body like the state legislature, if you're part of the minority, do you have a voice? Or at what point is it almost as if you can yell and no one will ever hear you?
Well, it very much depends on relationships.
Yeah.
Politics, government service, really anything I've found is a relationship-driven business. And if you can build relationships with people who are in the majority and agree where you can agree and disagree, without becoming disagreeable,
Yep.
then you can absolutely get things done.
You mentioned about building relationships and working together. In the state legislature, how many of the votes are really either unanimous or nearly unanimous, as opposed to the ones that make the media, make the news? Those are the ones that seem to get the press, yet a large amount of what gets done is with a consensus or a combined Democrat-Republican majority.
Yeah, the vast majority of the votes are non-controversial issues. And so I would say probably the neighborhood is well between 80 and 90%
Right.
are, hugely bipartisan, 100 plus votes out of 110 in favor, something like that. Yeah.
And in doing that, then, what have you found causes the division? In other words, what, not just types, but are there just philosophical differences? And as soon as you mention a word, they split sides?
Yeah, it's philosophical differences. A lot of it, to be honest with you, I think is a consequence of term limits in terms of lack of educational expertise on particular issues, lack of ability to move and really focus and dig deep in. When I got there and throughout the last 5 years, you hear from previous lawmakers who were around pre-term limits, and they talk about these kind of giants when it comes to people who really knew certain areas of the budget or really knew other areas. And
In education or things like that.
you name it. And you hear about how special interest lobbyists would come into those people's offices and they'd try to push an issue, and the lawmaker would know so much more about the issue than the special interest that they'd say, no, that's incorrect. And you'd have the lawmaker, the elected official, really driving the conversation. Now, post-term limits, oftentimes the most knowledgeable people about issues, unfortunately, are the special interests.
And that was one of the issues going back many years when the whole discussion about term limits came up, that the concern was that the power would shift from the elected official to the lobbyists, to the special interest group, because they would be the ones educating the elected official. In what areas have you been educated by them, and it hasn't been fair?
It's not always fair, but
Right.
it can be fair. I'd say a good quote-unquote lobbyist or advocate is one who knows a lot about an issue, and when you ask them what's the opposing side, they'll tell you that too.
Right.
And it's a fair and transparent process. And there absolutely are people out there who get paid to advocate and do so in that regard. There are also people who don't do that too. There's bad actors in every business. That's definitely one of them.
In your 5 years, what areas have you found some success, either directly in introducing legislation or working with the Republican majority to get maybe not everything you wanted, but get something added on to something that they were supporting to, be able to support some aspect of it?
Right. So definitely many areas that I'm proud of. You know, I think one of a couple of the more crowning achievements of the legislature since I've been there have been the bankruptcy of Detroit and now the subsequent resurgence of the city, really coming back in a lot of areas. Not all the way there, but you know, getting there, making progress. That's been a huge crowning achievement. I was very proud to vote on that.
Now, what was the vote? Do you remember approximately on the whole issue? Was it unanimous or near?
It was, if I
in the
remember
end?
correctly, it was between the mid-60s and the mid-70s
Okay.
out of 110 members in the House. I don't know about
Right,
the
yeah.
Senate, but
And
you
it
know,
was
sizable.
a bipartisan. It was not just one party or the other.
No, it was very bipartisan. In fact, actually, it's the only time in the time that I've been in the legislature where the vote started. We were there all night pretty much, and then we took a break, came back, and they were still writing all the bills after the agreement had been made. And when the final vote got done on the final bill, everybody just stopped and clapped.
Yeah.
And it was a really amazing moment to be a part of. And you just knew something special had happened.
Right.
You know, now 4 years later, basically,
Right, yeah.
we're seeing the resurgence of the city.
Yeah.
And that's been very exciting to see.
Right.
So
Now, areas that directly, you say, impact your district or the Ann Arbor area. Not that the bankruptcy issue in Detroit
Right.
doesn't impact Ann Arbor, because it does, as far as the whole southeast Michigan and that. But there are things that you were able to do that the people of Ann Arbor have a benefit from or feel as a result?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of the initiatives that I worked on the budget side of things had a direct impact in Ann Arbor, but they also had direct impact across the state. A lot of the work that I've done on creating stronger equity around STEM education is one area. A lot of the areas that we've done around education funding in general and some of the things regarding educator and administrator evaluations had impact in Ann Arbor and around Washtenaw County. So we've tried to, and when I look at the district here, I have parts of 5 school districts in the
Wow,
55th
okay.
district. And so, you know, we try and look at all of the school districts in addition to just Ann Arbor. There are 9 traditional school districts across the county. And so, but, you know, definitely those areas have impacted all of those districts. But I guess I have a philosophical belief that as a member of the State House of Representatives or a member of the State Senate for that matter, you know, our votes, even though I may come from one area of the state, they affect everybody across the state. And so I take very serious that when we do something, we need to try and do it as equitably as possible, unless there's a particular niche issue that affects an area. But in our area of the state, most of the issues are much more broad.
Right. And you mentioned the whole area of education and all the different aspects of it. It's more than just the funding issue.
Yeah, yes.
Once again, what gets into the press, what gets publicity is the issue of funding and how much per pupil an area will get. But beyond that, there's so much other things, as you mentioned, with evaluation of the administration of a school district, the types of educational opportunities students will get, all that fits in also.
Yeah, I mean, really, when you talk about education policy, this is a very nuanced field that has a lot of detail and a lot of really great hardworking people that are engaged in it. If you can talk anywhere from the pipeline of educators, so this is your preparation programs, the different types of things that go into that. There's that's a section in its own. You can talk about the development and the professional development opportunities once you're in the field. You could talk about the student programming aspects, and that ties into the funding. You know, obviously salary and the ability to attract educators to a field is something that is...
And one of the things that has been, while you've been in the legislature, is the whole pension issue, and whether it's within a district or, you know, what role the state has in overseeing something like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the issue around retirement health care is a huge issue for any public employee, especially educators, obviously. Yeah.
And that's something which now, from my understanding in talking about police and fire and other public service, was something that was going to be looked at, but now has been, put to the side?
So it hasn't been put to the side. So basically what we did this last week around police and fire health care and retirement, is that we have created a series of laws that are based on recommendations passed by the governor's task force on police and fire retirement and healthcare. And those were agreed upon. You had representatives from the police officers associations and the unions and the state and the local government side, so you had kind of all sides of the table. And they agreed upon these things as meaningful, positive reforms to try and deal with underfunding issues. And that underfunding is a real issue. And so these are a really good, healthy first step in the right direction. And I think that it's important to think that we weren't punitive in these reforms. And I think that's a really important part, particularly since a large contributor to the underfunding is because the state has withheld revenue sharing from local communities, thus
or reduced it significantly, and
right.
pensions is something which many can think, we'll worry about that later.
Exactly.
We have police and fire protection and services that have to be dealt with right now.
Right. And obviously anytime you've got into a situation where it's math at the end of the day, and it's not a direct impact.
Education aspect,
big time. And it's not a direct impact.
Yeah.
Then you kick the ball down the road if you can't pay for it.
Right.
And that's a direct result of the state decreasing that revenue sharing. There's $7.5 billion in decreases in revenue sharing. We're talking about significant, serious. And so many of us thought that, look, let's put into place the constructive reforms, and let's try and work on this a little bit, and let's work on increasing that revenue sharing. There's no need to be punitive, and quite frankly, it's manufactured crisis by the state in many regards.
Right. Well, we're going to take a short break, come back and look at some of the other issues that both for the last couple of weeks here in 2017, but also looking into 2018 that you and the legislature are going to be working on.
All right.
Ask our viewers to stay with us. We'll be back in just a moment.
Did you know that CTN welcomes the members of the Ann Arbor City Council to Ward Talk? On the third Wednesday of every month, a different representative from one of the city's 5 wards joins us in the studio to discuss matters important to the people and government of Ann Arbor. Submit your questions for the next episode of Ward Talk by emailing ctn@a2gov.org or visiting our Twitter page at CTN Ann Arbor.
Hello and welcome back to Conversations. I'm speaking today with State Representative Adam Zemke, and looking to your last, 13 months approximately,
Yep.
are there issues that you still want to sort of take on and try and tackle, and now that you know how to best work with others, that you might find some success on?
Yeah, there's definitely an issue that I've been working on for a while. It's taken a long time to craft, and that's around improving the educator pipeline, And
By that, what do you mean?
so we have a shortage of educators in the state of Michigan, and there's a lot of reasons for that. Some of it is definitely related to salary and benefits, and the fact that it's very difficult to make a good living, especially when you're a young educator coming out. Some young educators can qualify for public assistance, which is pretty sad. But there's also a lot that needs to be done in terms of improving the pipeline and working with educator preparation institutions to provide greater field experiences throughout the continuum of that education.
Part of it is having those who do decide to go into education legitimately know what they're getting into.
That's exactly right. Yes,
Yeah.
a big part of it. And, also really engaging them in the classroom as early as possible. Doing everything after they've already done 4 years of college and formal education. Not really a great way to do it. And so we are starting to see more of that. There's some work that we've done already, and quite a bit of work more to do.
What can the state do about that? I mean, what types of things are you looking at?
So there's all sorts of things, but the biggest thing is the state has influence over is the certification.
Okay.
And so the state universities have constitutional autonomy. That's not a bad thing at all by any means. But the certification around educators who go into a classroom is something the state does have control over. And we've been working with educators, and particularly around the University of Michigan, with former Dean Ball and now some of the associate deans around some of these changes that can be made. And so we're looking real positive. We don't have anything on paper yet. We're hoping to get something on paper in January, and we'll go from there.
All right, looking at both the past and the present and the future, one issue that seems to come up on a somewhat regular basis is the whole issue of auto insurance, and not just for Southeast Michigan, but statewide. There's a lot of talk, but any action?
So you saw a bill that was put forward predominantly by the chair of the insurance committee and the Speaker of the House earlier this year. It was supported by the insurance industry, which is kind of a red flag, a little bit. And what it would have done is it would have allowed a choice in terms of benefits for a promise of some degree of auto reduction payment. After we pulled back the wool a little bit on some of that proposal, we discovered that there were some serious problems with this. It would have really dramatically curtailed coverage in exchange for potentially not even any cost savings, depending on where you live. But nonetheless, the issue around the cost of auto insurance in Michigan is a very big deal. And
why is it so much more expensive in Michigan compared to other states?
That's a good question. And now
Are there laws that require things or that have historically led to an increase in expenses?
I think that it has to do with the fact that the way the auto no-fault system was written in the late 70s, it allows for very little regulation around insurance price setting and also savings to consumers. It doesn't mandate anything around cost savings be returned to consumers. It also allows for some, in certain areas, definitely price gouging by some bad actors in the medical community. There are some reasonable reforms that can be done across the board if you can get all three legs of the quote-unquote auto no-fault tripod, which are the insurance industry, the medical providers, and the attorneys that represent catastrophic victims, to come to the table and all kind of take a haircut. That's a way, and then you have to mandate that those rate savings go back to the consumers. And that's where we couldn't get those bills to earlier this year because of resistance. There's actually a counter proposal that a number of us signed on to, myself included, that includes curtailing costs for bad actors in the medical provider community, curtailing costs on the attorney side of things, mandating that rate savings be put back to consumers. And those things, I think, are met with resistance all across the board, but actually were somewhat supported by the attorneys and the medical provider community, definitely opposed by the insurance
Yeah.
industry. Because I think predominantly around that mandate. But the bottom line is that we should be doing something as a legislature. This is a dinner table pocketbook conversation. People have not seen their personal economic situation rise in Michigan with Michigan's improved economic climate. And this is one of the areas where we absolutely could help Michiganders out very easily as long as there's a political will. I'm hopeful that we can still get there. We do have this package of bills out there. We're hoping for some committee discussion on it. We'll see what happens.
And in looking at the process, as you just mentioned, the committees, having a chance to look at it, are there areas of legislation or things you've introduced that are sitting in committee that you're still trying to nudge or talk with committee members to at least get discussion going? Because many people don't realize that part of what happens is at a much smaller level.
Right.
That nothing gets to the floor until the committee has dealt with it.
That's exactly right. And there absolutely are. I mean, there are thousands of bills that are introduced
Yeah.
every legislative session that never get out of committee.
And some of those bills legitimately should never get out of committee.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Depending
None of
on your
yours, I'm
opinion,
sure,
of
but
course
yeah,
not. But I do have several bills that are stuck in committee. One, I introduced. Michigan recently changed its campaign finance laws to allow for essentially more money to be spent in elections, which I think is not a good idea at all. I think that we should be going more towards a public financing of elections, and so I introduced a bill that caps campaign contributions to...
So it's contributions that potentially are limited, not how much total you spend.
So basically the law that Michigan passed was an expansion of the Citizens United law on the federal level that allows for essentially large, big money special interest groups to invest more heavily. And also this law in Michigan, I voted against it, but what it did also as well is to allow for greater collaboration between and there's a lot of greater
interest,
exactly
a little bit,
bad ideas all the way around. And so kind of in response to that, I had it went through a committee. I sit on the Elections and Ethics Committee. I introduced a substitute to the bill that gutted out all those bad things and put in these $1 caps on contributions. We called it the $1 blue collar substitute. And I introduced it in subsequent bill form following the committee because it would just cap all campaign contributions to elected officials through their CTs at $1. And
would that only allow then the wealthy to run?
No, it would cap the self-funding too.
Oh, okay.
And so the goal is to get money out of politics. We have found everybody around election time, doesn't matter what your political affiliation is. You look on social media, people are complaining all the time about the election ads. Well, that is a direct result of the amount of money that is being spent to help influence the election.
And so all of it would go on social media where there's no cost, and then whoever...
We're trying to create an equitable playing field between those who don't have a lot of money and those who have a lot of money. And the same thing around the special interests. We should be going towards public financing, in my personal opinion.
And in respect to the campaign election, is that something that realistically is going to get play in the committee?
No, I like to poke and prod the committee chairman nearly daily.
As you say, it's elections and ethics.
So it is elections and ethics. But
this approaches both of those.
That's right. I don't think it's going to see the light of day, unfortunately, which is not the way it should be.
Right. Now, you being Ann Arbor, a representative from the Ann Arbor and Ann Arbor area, education, universities, colleges. There's been more talk or more discussion about, everyone should have free college education or some derivative of that. In higher education, where does the state stand, and are there proposals on either changing, modifying, or helping out those who want to go to not necessarily U of M, but community colleges and other universities? People forget there are lots of other options other than the university.
That's right. And there actually have been a lot of discussion around trying to make community college free, in fact, or essentially free to all individuals, which I'm in favor of. I think that's a great idea. Anything we could do to lower the total cost of higher education, no matter what kind of path you choose to take, that's a positive thing. That's better for our economy, it's better for individuals, and it makes a lot of sense too. And so through the community college system, which is pretty affordable actually, or systems across the state, we could do that at a reasonable cost. I don't know what the figure is, but there has been a lot of discussion about how we can try and make that essentially free for all people.
Right. And that would be something which would, I mean, as they're saying, there's no such thing as a free education.
Right.
It would be funded and paid for by the state.
Correct. Yeah.
And so on down economic years, does that mean that would also be one of those things that would have a reduction in funding as it did in 2008, 2010?
It's to be determined.
Yeah.
I think, you know, one of the things the state needs to start doing a better job of is, you know, looking at when we have an economic recession, you know, being smart with the money, but when we have economic growth and we're seeing more revenue coming in, we need to make those investments where we can, and then try to work on investments that are going to pay us dividends that we don't have to cut back down during the next economic
when you're
recession.
saying investments, you're not necessarily talking about the financial investment of money in a tax-free account or something. It's investments in the future, in people, in services, in the community colleges right now.
Yeah, correct. And also doing some savings. You know,
Yeah.
we need to make sure that the rainy day fund does have sufficient amounts of money in it that we can, you know, survive a significant downturn.
And one of the things I remember in the 80s when Ann Arbor was doing so well, almost every budget year, the mayor would find a way to reduce taxes to please one group, and also then allow increase in human services spending or other things. So pretty much both sides during a strong economic time, you could say, could broadcast the fact they did what their constituents wanted done.
Right. I think if you'll actually talk with most, you know, there's this on the federal level, not the state level, but the federal level, you hear this tax reform stuff that's going on right now. And you read some of the articles that actually interview people across the country, particularly in the Midwest, there's a lot of focus. And they're oftentimes not believing that any of this is actually going to work for them. And if you talk with people across the state of Michigan, we saw this when we've had discussions around roads.
Yep.
I think most people really just want to see core services really function well, which they're not right now. Right. They want to see their communities safe. They want to see their roads paved. They want to make sure that
trash gets collected.
Exactly. That they can save for their retirement, that they can get their kids into whatever the kids want to do. This is like bare bones basic stuff, and we're not doing a good job at it. We need to be improving in those areas.
Well, I want to thank you for joining us this afternoon. It's always a pleasure to have you back on the show, and wish you the best in your last year or so in the legislature.
Thank you very much, Jim. I appreciate being here. It's always good.
Great. I want to thank our viewers for joining us today and look forward to your continued support here on Conversations. Thank you.